Typhoeus, also called Typhon, was a monstrous and terrifying storm giant whose story is deeply tied to the ancient struggles of gods and the forces of nature. He was known as a fierce and destructive being who dared to challenge the very order of the heavens. This giant laid siege to heaven itself in a battle that shook the world, trying to overthrow the rule of the gods. His strength and power were beyond ordinary, and he was said to be so huge that his head brushed the stars in the sky, making him an awe-inspiring figure. From his waist upward, he appeared like a man, but instead of normal legs, he had two coiled serpents that twisted and writhed. His hands were no ordinary hands either, for each one had 100 serpent heads as fingers, making his grasp deadly and monstrous. He had a wild, filthy beard that was matted and tangled, giving him a savage and fearsome look. His ears were pointed like those of a beast, and his eyes flashed with fire, glowing with an intense and dangerous light that revealed the fury burning inside him. Some stories go further to say that Typhoeus had 200 hands, with 50 serpent-headed fingers on each hand, and 100 heads, one of which was human, while the other 99 were wild and bestial, including the heads of bulls, boars, serpents, lions, and leopards. This gave him a terrifying and chaotic appearance, symbolizing the power and danger of untamed nature and storms. Later poets described him as a volcano giant, and in this form, he was said to be trapped beneath the weight of Mount Echidna, or Etna, in Sicily. This volcano giant form linked him to the giant Enceladus, or Enceladus, who was also said to be buried beneath a mountain, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions as he struggled beneath the earth. As a volcano demon, Typhoeus hurled fiery rocks at heaven, and fire boiled and poured forth from his mouth like molten lava, showing how his rage and power could shake the very foundations of the world. His wild and destructive storms were believed to come from the dark and deep pit of Tartaros, a shadowy underworld realm where he was imprisoned after his defeat by Zeus, the king of the gods. Zeus battled fiercely against Typhoeus to protect the order of the universe, and after a great struggle, he defeated the storm giant and cast him down into Tartaros, locking him away in a place far below the earth. This defeat did not end Typhoeus's power entirely, for the storms and volcanic eruptions were said to be his angry breath, and his fiery rage escaping from the dark pit where he was held. The family of Typhoeus traces back to some of the most ancient and powerful figures of Greek mythology. His parents were Tartaros and Gaia, two primordial beings who represented the deep underworld and the earth itself. Gaia, the great Earth Mother, gave birth to many powerful and strange creatures, and with Tartaros, the shadowy and dark pit of the underworld, she brought forth Typhoeus, the storm giant who challenged heaven. This lineage shows how Typhoeus was born from the deepest and darkest parts of the world, combining the forces of earth and the hidden depths below to create a being of immense and terrible power. Some ancient sources also mention Gaia alone as his mother, highlighting her role as the source of many monstrous and powerful beings who disturbed the order of the gods. Typhoeus' story is a symbol of the wild and dangerous forces of nature that threaten to break free and challenge the rule of the gods and the order of the cosmos. His monstrous form with serpent legs and many heads, his fiery breath and volcanic power, and his place beneath the earth's surface all speak of the violent and chaotic power that lies just beneath the calm surface of the world. Even though he was defeated and imprisoned, his influence could still be felt in the storms that battered the land and the volcanoes that spewed fire, reminding mortals and gods alike of the restless and dangerous power hidden deep within the earth. Thus, Typhoeus stands as a great and terrible figure in mythology, a storm giant whose defeat by Zeus secured the safety of heaven, but whose fiery rage still shaped the world from his dark prison below. Typhoeus, sometimes called Typhon, was a monstrous figure from the earliest world, a creature born from the very forces of chaos and destruction. He was described in many ways, sometimes as a great hurricane that tore through the land, a violent storm that could uproot trees and shatter mountains. Other times, he was imagined as a giant who breathed fire, a fearsome being whose rage and power threatened both gods and mortals. According to the poet Homer, Typhoeus was hidden deep in the land of the Arami, a place in the earth itself, where Zeus would strike him with lightning bolts to keep him trapped and controlled. This dark realm was where the power of the storm and fire lived, and Typhoeus was the terrifying force behind it all. In the ancient stories told by Hesiod, there is a distinction between two beings, Typhoon and Typhoeus. Typhoon was said to be the son of Typhoeus and was known as a dreadful hurricane. From Typhoon and the monstrous Echidna came many of the most famous and frightening creatures of Greek mythology. Among their children were Orthos, a two-headed dog, Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld, the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads that grew back when cut, the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster with parts of a lion, goat, and serpent, and the Sphinx, a creature known for its riddles and deadly nature. These creatures were symbols of danger and chaos in the ancient stories, and their parentage linked them to the wild and powerful forces of nature represented by Typhoeus and Echidna. Despite the confusion in later writings where Typhoon and Typhoeus sometimes become mixed together, the original meaning of Typhoon as a violent hurricane remained clear in everyday speech and tradition. Ancient writers like Aristophanes and Pliny the Elder made reference to this force of nature in their works, showing how deeply the idea of Typhoon was rooted in the understanding of storms and destructive winds. Typhoeus himself, on the other hand, was described as the youngest son of Tartarus and Gaia, or sometimes said to be born of Hera alone, because of her anger and desire to challenge the authority of Zeus. Tartarus, the deep and dark pit of the underworld, and Gaia, the great Earth Mother, together produced this terrible being, combining the forces of the earth and the depths below to bring forth a creature that embodied destruction and wild power. This made Typhoeus a figure connected to the oldest and most primal parts of the world, representing the dangerous and uncontrollable forces that could threaten the order of the universe. The family of Typhoeus was vast and terrifying, filled with many monstrous children and descendants. Among them were Orthos and Kerberos, two fearsome multi-headed dogs that guarded sacred and dangerous places. The Hydra, with its many heads that multiplied when cut, was a creature of endless menace. The Chimera, a strange beast made up of parts of different animals, was one of the most dreadful monsters. Ladon, a serpent-like dragon, guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides, and the Sphinx, a creature part woman and part lion, was known for riddles that could mean death. These monstrous children were all born of Echidna, a fearsome creature herself, often called the mother of all monsters, and Typhoon, linking back to the powerful storm giant Typhoeus. Other terrifying beings connected to this family included the Chimera, the Nemean lion, known for its impenetrable skin, the Colchian Drakon, a great dragon, and the Hesperian Drakon. Scylla, another monster from the sea, was also among the fearful offspring. These creatures haunted the lands and seas, challenging heroes and gods alike, their origins tied to the chaotic and destructive powers of Typhoeus and his kin. The storm god's influence even extended to the winds and the Harpia, winged spirits of storm and storm winds, known for their swift and violent nature, causing havoc wherever they flew. These Harpia were considered part of the storm's destructive power and linked to the same family of creatures born from chaos and destruction. The stories of Typhoeus and his family are closely tied to the ancient understanding of natural disasters and monstrous threats. Typhoeus himself was sometimes seen as a volcano demon, a being whose fiery rage caused eruptions and earthquakes. Trapped beneath Mount Echidna in Sicily, this giant's movements were said to shake the earth and send fire and smoke billowing into the sky. In this volcanic form, he was identified with the giant Enceladus, another monstrous figure buried beneath a mountain and causing natural disasters as he struggled to break free. This connection to volcanic power gave Typhoeus a terrifying presence that was not just about wind and storms, but also the earth's fiery fury. His breath was said to boil with fire, and he hurled red-hot rocks at the heavens in anger. His massive form, with a man-shaped upper body and serpent legs coiled beneath him, made him a figure that could not be ignored. His 100 serpent heads for fingers and a beard tangled with filth added to the horror he inspired. Some described him with 200 hands and 100 heads, 1 human and 99 animal, with features of bulls, boars, serpents, lions, and leopards, creating a terrifying mosaic of nature's wildest and most dangerous animals. Despite his fearsome power, Typhoeus was ultimately defeated by Zeus, the king of the gods. Zeus fought the monstrous giant in a battle that threatened the order of the cosmos itself. After a fierce struggle, Zeus was victorious and imprisoned Typhoeus in the dark pit of Tartarus, deep below the earth, where he could no longer harm the heavens or the world above. Yet even in imprisonment, the power of Typhoeus was not completely gone. The storms that ravaged the earth and the eruptions that shook the land were said to be caused by Typhoeus's anger and fury escaping from his prison. This shows how the ancient Greeks understood the connection between their myths and the natural world, seeing in Typhoeus the explanation for violent storms, volcanic eruptions, and the chaos of nature. His story is a reminder of the fragile balance between order and chaos, and the need for powerful forces like Zeus to keep the world safe. In some versions, Hera, the queen of the gods, is also connected to Typhoeus. She was said to be his mother alone in certain myths, perhaps because of her anger towards Zeus and her desire to create a being capable of challenging him. This link to Hera adds another layer to the story, showing how the gods themselves were part of the great struggle for power and control. Through these stories, Typhoeus's place in the world is made clear. He is the child of the deepest earth and the dark underworld, a force of destruction born from the primal elements of the world. His many children, the terrifying monsters of myth, carry on his legacy of chaos and danger. The great battle between Zeus and Typhoeus represents the fight between order and chaos, a theme that runs throughout Greek mythology. Even though Typhoeus was defeated and locked away, his presence was felt in the storms, the winds, and the volcanic fire that shaped the world. The ancient poets and storytellers used his story to explain these powerful natural events and to remind listeners of the dangers that lie beneath the surface of the world. Thus, Typhoeus remains a symbol of the wild, destructive forces of nature, a monstrous storm giant who once challenged the heavens and whose fury still echoes through the storms and volcanoes of the earth. He was a creature with 100 heads, each filled with fearsome eyes and voices that struck terror into all who heard them. His roar and cries were so dreadful that they seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. His goal was to take over the sovereignty of gods and men, to become the ruler of all, challenging even the might of Zeus himself. This ambition led to a great and terrible struggle between Typhoeus and Zeus, a battle filled with thunder and lightning, where Zeus finally subdued the monster by hurling a powerful thunderbolt. After this violent conflict, Typhoeus was defeated and cast down to be imprisoned, but his legacy was marked by his fearsome power and the chaos he represented. Typhoeus was said to have begotten the winds, making him the father of the Harpies, those winged spirits of storm and destruction that haunted the skies. However, the good and gentle winds like Notus, Boreas, Argestes, and Zephyrus were not his children, showing that his offspring were of a darker and more violent nature. Ancient poets like Aeschylus and Pindar told of Typhoeus living in a cave in Cilicia, a place where this wild force was hidden from the eyes of the gods and men. Other writers, such as Apollonius Rhodius and Herodotus, gave different ideas about his home and nature, but all agreed on his fearsome presence and power. The great battle between Typhoeus and the gods was said to have involved all the immortals, a mighty struggle that threatened the order of the heavens. In the end, Zeus, with a flash of lightning, killed Typhoeus and buried him deep beneath Mount Etna, the fiery mountain in Sicily known for its volcanic eruptions. This mountain was considered the workshop of Hephaestus, the god of fire and blacksmiths, making it a fitting prison for a fire-breathing giant like Typhoeus. Later poets often linked Typhoeus with Egypt, telling stories of the gods fleeing there when they could no longer fight him. To hide from his terrible power, the gods transformed themselves into animals, except for Zeus and Athena, who remained in their true forms. This story showed how great and terrifying Typhoeus' power was, able to drive even the gods to fear and disguise. The name Typhoeus itself came in different forms in ancient texts, with Greek spellings like Typhon, Typhion, and Typhos, transliterated as Typhon, Typhaon, and Typhos. The Latin spellings Typhon, Typhaon, and Typhos were also used. His name meant things like cyclone, hurricane, or smoking one, all words that spoke of violent storms and fire, perfectly capturing his nature as a force of destruction. In art, Typhoeus was often shown as a terrifying figure, such as on a Laconian black figure Kylix from the 6th century BC, held in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The ancient poet Hesiod, in his work Theogony, described the birth and parentage of Typhoeus, telling that he was the son of Tartarus, the dark pit beneath the earth, and Gaia, the Earth Mother. Some stories say that Hera, angry and indignant at Zeus for giving birth to Athena, was also connected to the birth of Typhoeus, perhaps making him a child born of her wrath. This connection to such powerful primordial forces showed that Typhoeus was no ordinary monster, but a being born from the deepest and darkest parts of the world, embodying chaos and destruction. The stories and descriptions of Typhoeus throughout ancient literature show a being of immense and terrifying power, one who once challenged the rule of the gods and threatened the very order of the universe. His many heads, voices, and eyes, his link to storms and fire, and his final defeat and imprisonment beneath Mount Etna are all parts of a myth that explains the dangerous forces of nature and the balance between order and chaos. Typhoeus' story reminds us of the powerful forces hidden beneath the surface of the earth and sky, forces that can erupt in storms, volcanic eruptions, and destructive winds, all symbols of his continuing presence in the world even after his defeat. This tale, passed down through the ages, holds the image of a storm giant whose rage and power shaped the ancient imagination, showing how the Greeks understood the wild and dangerous side of the natural world through the figure of Typhoeus. After Zeus had driven the Titans from heaven, The great Earth Mother Gaia, filled with love for the dark and deep pit called Tartaros, brought forth her youngest child through the power of golden Aphrodite. This child was Typhoeus, a monstrous being born from the joining of Earth and the underworld's depths. The story tells that the fierce and cruel Typhoeus was raised by Echidna, the fearsome she-dragon of Delphi, who received him from the queen of the gods herself, Hera. Hera bore Typhoeus not from love, but from anger and resentment towards Zeus. When Zeus had given birth to the glorious Athena from his own head, Hera grew furious and decided to bring forth a son who would be strong and terrible, rivaling Zeus in power. Hera spoke among the gods, declaring her plan to have a child without breaking the sacred bond of marriage with Zeus, refusing to lie with him, but instead seeking the help of other gods from a distance. Filled with rage, Hera withdrew from the company of the gods and prayed fiercely, striking the ground with her hand as she called upon Gaia, the earth, and Ouranos, the sky, along with the Titans who dwelled near the deep pit of Tartaros. She asked them to grant her a child born apart from Zeus, a child who would be no less mighty than Zeus, and even stronger, so that he might surpass the king of the gods, as Zeus had surpassed his own father, Kronos. Gaia, the life-giving earth, was moved by Hera's powerful prayer, and Hera was glad in her heart, believing that her wish would be granted. From this union, Typhoeus came into the world, a child born of anger and earth and darkness, destined to challenge the gods and shake the heavens. Typhoeus was a monstrous storm giant, terrifying in form and power. His 100 heads each had fearful eyes and terrible voices that struck dread into anyone who heard them. His goal was to take control of the world, to claim the sovereignty of gods and men alike. But his ambitions brought him into a great and fearful battle with Zeus, the king of the gods. Zeus fought him fiercely, using thunderbolts and lightning to strike down the storm giant, finally subduing him after a violent struggle. Though defeated, Typhoeus's power did not vanish. He was cast down into the dark depths of Tartarus, buried beneath Mount Etna, a fiery mountain known for its volcanic eruptions. Here, the workshop of Hephaestus, god of fire and metal, served as his prison. Yet the violent storms and eruptions of fire that shook the earth were said to be the breath and fury of Typhoeus escaping from his prison, reminding mortals of the terrible power still contained within him. Later, poets connected Typhoeus to Egypt, telling tales of the gods fleeing there in fear, transforming themselves into animals to hide from his wrath. Only Zeus and Athena remained in their true forms, standing firm against the monstrous storm giant. The name Typhoeus means cyclone, hurricane, or smoking one, perfectly capturing the violent and fiery nature of this terrible being. His story is tied deeply to the forces of nature and the battle between order and chaos. Born from the earth and the pit, raised in anger and resentment, Typhoeus was a symbol of wild power that threatened the order of the cosmos. His many heads, his terrifying roar, and his fiery breath all mark him as a force of destruction that challenged the gods themselves. Though he was defeated and imprisoned, his presence remained in the storms and fires of the world, a constant reminder of the chaos lurking beneath the surface of the earth and sky. This story, told in ancient epic and hymn, shows the great struggle between the forces of creation and destruction, between the gods who rule and the wild powers that threaten to break free. Typhoeus's birth and battle remind us of the power of nature and the eternal fight to keep balance in the universe. After a long year during which queenly Hera lay apart from the bed of wise Zeus, waiting with fierce anger and resolve, the time finally came when she bore a child unlike any other, neither like the gods nor mortal men. This child was the fell and cruel Typhoon, a terrible plague to humankind. Without the touch of a father, born of Hera's wrath and the earth's dark depths, Typhon was a being of immense power and terrible nature. Immediately, Hera, the large-eyed queen of the gods, took this monstrous son and brought him to the care of the Echidna, a fearsome she-dragon who accepted him. It was under her protection that Typhoon grew and used his strength to work great mischief among the famous tribes of men, spreading fear and destruction across the lands. The ancient poets, such as Pindar, spoke of Typhoon as the 100-headed beast, a monstrous being bred in the famous cave of Cilicia, a dark and wild place where such terrible creatures were said to dwell. Stesichorus, writing in earlier centuries, also described Typhoeus as the son of Hera, born without a father, a direct spite against Zeus for the birth of Athena. This fierce resentment by Hera was a driving force behind Typhoeus' existence, marking him as a symbol of rebellion and chaos against the rule of the Olympian gods. Aeschylus, in his tragedy Prometheus Bound, called Typhon Earthborn, tying him closely to Gaia, the Earth Mother, as his source. This connection with the earth shows the ancient view of Typhoeus as a primal force, born from the very soil of the world and the dark, hidden places beneath it. Pseudo-Apollodorus, the mythographer of the 2nd century AD, explained how the defeat of the giants, known as the Gigantes, by the gods angered Gaia even more. In her fury, she joined with Tartaros, the deep pit beneath the earth, and from this union was born Typhon in Cilicia, a region often associated with terrifying creatures and storms. Typhon was described as a mixture of man and beast, the largest and strongest of all Gaia's children. A monstrous hybrid that combined many terrifying features into one fearsome form. This monstrous birth highlights the deep anger of the Earth Mother at the defeat of her other children, and Typhon became the ultimate challenge to the gods' power. Roman mythographer Pseudo-Hyginus called Typhon a creature of immense size and fearful shape, born from Tartarus and Tartara, emphasizing his enormous and frightening appearance. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, described Typhoeus as issuing from the earth's lowest depths, a being born of the earth itself, Terragena or earthborn, emphasizing his connection to the dark and powerful forces beneath the surface. Virgil, in his Georgics, also referred to Typhoeus as earthborn, a figure who represented the dangerous and uncontrollable powers hidden deep within the earth. These ancient poets and mythographers all spoke of Typhoeus as a primal force, born from the darkest parts of the world, a creature whose very nature was to challenge the heavens and threaten the order of the cosmos. His 100 heads, his mix of man and beast, his vast size and his fearsome strength made him unlike any other creature, a symbol of chaos and destruction that no mortal or god could ignore. Typhoeus' story, told across centuries and cultures, shows how deeply the ancient world understood the wild and dangerous powers of nature, personified in a single terrible being. His birth from Hera's anger and the earth's depths, his growth under the care of the she-dragon Echidna, and his later battles with Zeus form a tale of conflict between order and chaos, between the gods who rule the world and the wild forces that seek to break free. Through the voices of poets and mythographers, Typhoeus remains a powerful symbol of nature's fury, a reminder of the dangers hidden beneath the calm surface of the world, and a figure whose story helped explain the storms, earthquakes, and volcanic fires that shaped the ancient understanding of the earth and sky. In the ancient stories of the gods and monsters, Typhoeus stands out as one of the most fearsome and terrible beings ever born from the earth. a monstrous child of Gaia who came into the world during a time when the Titans and giants sought to overthrow the order of the heavens. The texts tell us that during the monstrous labor of Earth giving birth to her children, among them were Coeus and Iapetus, but also the fierce Typhoeus and his brothers, the Gigantes, who were united in their aim to break down the rule of heaven itself. Typhoeus was unlike any other creature in the mythic world. His hands and arms were mighty and full of strength, always busy with powerful work, and his feet were tireless, never slowing down as he moved with unstoppable force. Rising from his shoulders grew not just one or two heads, but 100 serpent heads, like the dreadful Draken, each coiled and alive with dark tongues flicking out. From the eyes beneath the lids of these monstrous heads, fierce fire glittered and flared, filling the air with an unbearable heat. Each of these terrible heads held voices that could produce every kind of horrible sound imaginable. Sometimes these voices spoke words that the gods could understand, but more often they roared with the sound of a bellowing bull, proud-eyed and full of furious rage. At other times, the cries resembled a lion's cruel and shameless roar, or the barking of wild dogs, all blending into a terrifying symphony that could shake the mountains and echo through the valleys. Sometimes Typhoeus would whistle with such power that the tall mountains around him would re-echo the sound, spreading terror and fear far and wide. Ancient poets like Pindar called him the 100-headed Typhon, a name that captured his overwhelming and terrible form. Fragments from Greek lyric poetry speak of the coiling of Typhon, as if he were a great serpent winding through the land, and Aeschylus, in his tragedy Prometheus Bound, called him a destructive monster with 100 heads, impetuous and fierce, who faced all the gods with terror in his jaws and a hideous glare flashing from his eyes. This great beast was a mixture of man and beast, blending human shape with monstrous parts, making him a symbol of the wild and chaotic forces of nature. His many heads, his fiery eyes, and his terrible voice all spoke of his power and rage, a being born from the earth's deepest anger and the dark places beneath the surface. The mixture of human and beast in Typhoeus's form showed how he was not just a monster, but a force of nature itself, wild and uncontrollable. The ancient mythographers tell us that Typhoeus was the largest and strongest of all the children born to earth, a mighty figure who could not be easily defeated. His goal was to overthrow the gods and seize control of the heavens and the world below, a goal that led to his great battle with Zeus. This battle was fierce and shook the very foundations of the cosmos, with thunder and lightning clashing against Typhoeus's fiery breath and serpent heads. Zeus finally defeated Typhoeus with a mighty thunderbolt, casting him down beneath Mount Etna, the fiery mountain that became his prison. Even trapped, Typhoeus's power could still be felt in the storms and volcanic fires that shook the earth, reminding all of the terrible force still held within him. Typhoeus's story, passed down through epic poems, lyric songs, and tragic plays, reveals the ancient understanding of nature's wild power: storm, fire, earth, and chaos, all embodied in one monstrous figure. His many serpent heads and fiery eyes made him a living storm and a symbol of destruction, the child of Earth's deepest anger and the dark pit of Tartarus, whose fury could never be fully silenced. In this way, Typhoeus stands as a great and terrible reminder of the chaotic powers that lurk beneath the calm surface of the world, a creature born to challenge the gods and to test the balance between order and chaos in the universe. Typhoeus was known as the largest and strongest of all Gaia's children, a terrifying giant whose size and power surpassed all others born from the earth. From the waist up, he had the shape of a man, but he was so enormous that his head often brushed the stars above, towering far beyond even the highest mountains. His arms stretched wide, with one reaching to the far west and the other to the east, and attached to these arms were 100 serpent heads, each alive and writhing, adding to his monstrous and dreadful appearance. From his thighs downward, instead of legs, great coils of vipers extended all the way up to the top of his head, hissing with a terrible and powerful sound that echoed through the air. His entire body was covered in wings, making him a creature not just of earth but also of the sky, capable of terrible movement and fury. The hair that flowed from his head and cheeks was thick, matted, and dirty, blowing wildly in the wind and adding to his frightening look. His eyes shone with flashing fire, a blazing light that revealed his anger and destructive power. Such was the appearance of Typhoeus, a giant storm monster who hurled red-hot rocks toward the sky as if to attack the heavens themselves. He shouted and hissed with a fierce and terrifying voice, while from his mouth burst great storms of fire that boiled and roared like a raging volcano. His presence was like a force of nature, unstoppable and overwhelming, striking fear into gods and mortals alike. In ancient Greece, his fearsome image was so powerful that artists carved him alongside other monstrous beings, like Echidna, the half-woman, half-serpent creature who bore many terrible monsters, and Tritones, the fish-tailed sea gods, on the throne of Apollo at Amyclae near Sparta. Here, Typhoeus stood as a symbol of chaos and destruction, set opposite the calm and ordered sea creatures, showing the battle between the wild and the controlled forces of nature. Ancient mythographers like Antoninus Liberalis described Typhon as the son of earth, a monstrous god because of his great strength and terrible shape. Numerous heads, hands, and wings grew out from his body, and from his thighs came the huge serpent coils that hissed with deadly power. His roars could shake the world, and nothing could stand against his might. Roman mythographers agreed, describing Typhon as a creature of enormous size and fearsome shape, with 100 dragon heads springing from his shoulders, making him a living storm of terror. The Greek poet Nonnus, in his epic Dionysiaca, told of Typhoeus yelling his war cry, a terrible and powerful sound that filled the skies and warned all of the coming destruction. This image of Typhoeus, with his many heads, fiery eyes, wings, and serpent coils, captures the ancient idea of a storm giant who was both a force of nature and a monstrous enemy of the gods. His size and power were unmatched, making him a true terror of the ancient world, a creature born of the earth's deepest anger and the fiery chaos beneath the surface. His great battle with Zeus, in which he hurled fire and stones at the heavens, was a fight between the forces of order and chaos, between the king of the gods and a wild power that threatened to destroy all. Though Typhoeus was eventually defeated and imprisoned beneath Mount Etna, his story lives on in the myths and poems that speak of his terrible form and the storms and fires that remind mortals of his enduring power. Typhoeus was not only a monstrous storm giant of enormous size and terrible power, but also the father of many fearsome creatures, a being whose very body was a twisting mass of wild and dangerous beasts. His form was like no other, with snakes growing from his body, their writhing coils waving over and around his many heads shaped like leopards, licking the fierce manes of grim lions, and spiraling with their curled tails around the horns of raging bulls. These snakes flicked their long, thin, poisonous tongues that mingled with the foam and spittle of furious boars, creating a terrifying mix of animal ferocity and deadly venom. With feet that trailed and twisted like serpents, Typhoeus rose up high, mounting close to the clouds as his many arms spread wide across the sky. His tangled army of snakes shadowed the bright and clear light of the sun, darkening the heavens with their twisting and coiling forms. As Typhoeus bowed his flashing eyebrows and shook his wild locks, every strand of his hair seemed to drip with viper poison, drenching the hills and lands beneath him. Throwing red-hot rocks around, he leapt toward Mount Olympus itself, the home of the gods, challenging their very rule. His crooked, snake-like feet left a twisted trail as he moved, spitting showers of poison from his throat. The mountain streams swelled into torrents as the monster's venom poured from the serpent bristles on his towering head. The solid earth itself sank beneath his step, and the steady ground of Cilicia trembled to its core under the weight of his draken-like feet. Typhoeus roared with all the voices of the many tongues growing from his 100 heads, his roar carrying far across the lands, even reaching the distant streams of Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world. But the response was no simple echo. It was a dreadful babble of screaming sounds from his many animal heads. As he prepared for battle, his monstrous forms filled the air with terrifying noises: the yowling of wolves, the roaring of lions, the grunting of wild boars, the lowing of cattle, the hissing of countless serpents, the fierce barking of leopards, the snapping jaws of bears rearing up, and the fierce fury that even the gods would fear. Among this terrible noise, Typhoeus's one human-shaped head shouted terrible threats against Zeus, the king of the gods, challenging his power and authority. This image of Typhoeus is one of chaos made flesh, a swirling mass of animal power and venomous danger, a symbol of nature's wild, untamed forces combined into a single terrifying figure. He was not just a monster, but the father of many of the worst beasts in mythology, born to spread terror and destruction throughout the world. The ancient poet Hesiod, in his Theogony, tells how Typhoeus was the father of great and fearsome monsters that would trouble gods and men alike. His monstrous body and wild nature made him a being unlike any other, the ultimate source of many evils and dangers. The story of Typhoeus as a father of monsters ties him directly to the wild, chaotic side of nature, a force that the gods had to fight and contain. His wild snakes and animal heads were not only part of his terrifying appearance, but also the beginning of many creatures that would later become infamous in Greek myth. Through Typhoeus, the ancient storytellers explained the origin of many beasts that threatened human life and challenged the gods' power. His own form was a gathering of the most dangerous animals: lions, snakes, boars, bears, and leopards, all combined into one living storm of destruction. His voice was the loud chorus of all these beasts, a terrible symphony that filled the world with fear. His threat to Zeus was the threat of chaos itself, a challenge to the order and peace that the gods worked to maintain. Typhoeus's presence in the stories shows how the ancient Greeks understood the wild and dangerous powers of the natural world. Through him, they gave shape to the terrible forces that could destroy crops, homes, and lives, the storms that raged without warning, and the wild animals that hunted without mercy. His monstrous form was a reminder of the danger beneath the calm and the struggle to keep the world safe from chaos. This tale of Typhoeus as the father of monsters is a story of the eternal battle between the forces of destruction and the powers of order. A story told again and again in the myths that have survived through the ages, warning of the wildness that lies at the heart of nature and the courage it takes to face it. Typhoeus, the terrible and lawless storm giant, was said to have been joined in love to the fearsome Echidna, the maid with glancing eyes who herself was a creature of monstrous birth and dreadful power. Together, they became the parents of some of the most dreadful and powerful monsters known in ancient myth. Their first child was Orthos, the two-headed hound who guarded the cattle of the giant Geryones, a fierce beast known for his sharp teeth and savage strength. Following Orthos, they bore another terrifying creature, Kerberos, the mighty three-headed dog who guarded the gates of Hades, the underworld. This brazen-voiced hound was relentless, with 50 heads according to some stories, all hungry for raw flesh and fierce beyond any mortal or divine control. Kerberos was a fearsome guardian who would not allow the dead to escape and kept the living from entering the realm of the dead. The monstrous family grew further with the birth of the evil-minded Hydra of Lerna, a serpent with many heads that grew back if cut off, making her nearly impossible to kill. This Hydra was nourished by the white-armed goddess Hera herself, who held great anger against the hero Heracles, who was destined to face and battle this creature. The Hydra's multiple heads and poisonous breath made her a symbol of deadly danger, a creature that could only be overcome by great strength and cunning. Another dreadful child of Typhoeus and Echidna was the Chimera, or Chimera, a creature of 3 heads and terrible fire-breathing power. This beast had the head of a grim-eyed lion, the middle of a goat, and the tail of a dragon serpent. Swift-footed and strong, the Chimera breathed raging fire and brought terror wherever she roamed. This monster was finally slain by the noble hero Bellerophontes, who rode the winged horse Pegasus to victory, showing that even the most fearsome beasts could be defeated by courage and skill. Ancient poets like the Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo spoke of these monsters as children of Typhoeus and Echidna, linking the great storm giant to this terrible family of beasts. Apollo himself gloated over the vanquished Echidna and the Chimera, declaring that not even Typhoeus or the fierce Chimera could protect against cruel death, highlighting the tragic fate of even the most monstrous beings. The Sphinx, another dreadful creature, was also said to be a daughter of Echidna and Typhon, a beast known for her riddles and deadly challenges, guarding the city of Thebes and threatening all who passed. This lineage of monsters, born from the union of Typhoeus and Echidna, represents the wild and dangerous forces of nature and chaos, born to challenge gods and men alike. According to mythographers like Pseudo-Apollodorus, the Chimera was reared by a mortal named Amisodaros, but her true parents were Typhoeus and Echidna, tying the monstrous creature back to this terrible divine family. Their children were not only beasts of great power, but also guardians of sacred places, such as the immortal serpent or dragon that guarded the golden apples in the gardens of the Hesperides, another of the fearsome creatures born of this monstrous line. These myths paint a picture of a dark and violent family tree, where the union of a storm giant and a Dracaena, she-dragon, gave rise to some of the most terrifying beings ever imagined, beasts that embodied destruction, chaos, and the wild forces beyond human control. This monstrous brood challenged heroes, threatened gods, and stood as living reminders of the dangers lurking at the edges of the known world, symbols of the wildness that even the gods could barely contain. The stories of Typhoeus and Echidna and their dreadful children became central to the ancient understanding of evil and danger, representing the ever-present threat of destruction and the need for courage and strength to face it. Typhon and Echidna together were said to be the parents of many dreadful and monstrous creatures in Greek mythology. Their offspring feared across the lands and tales told through the ages. Among their terrifying children was a beast with 100 heads, each speaking in different voices, a creature so fearsome that no words could truly capture its horror. This many-headed monster added to the chaos and terror that Typhon and Echidna represented. One of their monstrous children was the great eagle that lived on the Caucasus Mountains, a fierce bird born of Echidna and Typhon. This eagle was known for its cruel habit of eating the liver of the Titan Prometheus, who was punished for giving fire to mankind. The hero Heracles, during his many adventures, came to the mainland opposite this dreadful mountain, and with a swift arrow slew the terrible eagle, ending its torment over Prometheus and marking one more victory over the monstrous children of Typhon and Echidna. The city of Thebes once suffered under a terrible scourge, for the goddess Hera sent the Sphinx upon it, a creature whose parents were also said to be Typhon and Echidna. The Sphinx brought great misery and fear, tormenting the people with her deadly riddles and causing death to those who could not answer her. The rule of King Creon in Thebes was marked by this dark presence until heroes rose to confront and end her reign of terror. Another monstrous creature, a great sow known as Phaya, terrorized the lands near Crommyon. This savage beast, said by some to be born of Typhon and Echidna, was slain by the hero Theseus, who was famous for his courage and strength in facing the wild and dangerous forces of myth. These creatures, born of the dreadful union of Typhon and Echidna, roamed the lands or guarded terrible places, always posing a threat to mortals and gods alike. The king of Mysia, Amycos, was described by the poet Apollonius Rhodius as resembling a monstrous offspring of the ogre Typhoeus, hinting at the far-reaching influence of these terrifying beings. Another fearsome child was the Colchian dragon, a deathless and ever-watchful beast said to be born from the earth itself on the slopes of the Caucasus, near the very rock where Typhoon had been struck down by Zeus's thunderbolt. This dragon was a powerful guardian, never sleeping and guarding precious treasures, symbolizing the eternal dangers that came from the monstrous bloodline of Typhon. The three-headed hound Kerberos, guardian of the underworld gates, was born of Echidna and Typhon in the dark caverns close to the edge of eternal night, a creature of immense strength and terror that kept the souls of the dead confined and barred the living from the land of shadows. Near the rugged cliffs by Troy, there was said to be a cave too high and steep for any to climb, where two deadly sea dragons of Typhon's fearsome brood dwelt, terrifying all who approached and adding to the stories of monstrous descendants spreading fear throughout the world. These stories of monsters born of Typhon and Echidna speak of a family of creatures born from chaos and darkness, creatures that represented the wild, uncontrollable, and dangerous forces in the ancient world. They were not only foes to mankind, but also challengers to the gods themselves, symbols of the struggle between order and chaos, civilization and the wild unknown. The many-headed beasts, the fiery dragons, the terrible guardians of the underworld, and the monsters that plagued cities and lands were all linked by this dark lineage, and their stories told the ancient fears and struggles of humans facing a dangerous and unpredictable world. Through these myths, the ancient poets and storytellers gave voice to the terrors that lay beyond the edges of safety and order, reminding all who heard of the power of nature's wildness and the bravery needed to overcome it. Among their dreadful offspring was the Gorgon, a terrifying creature whose gaze could turn any living being to stone, forever frozen in fear and death. From this dreadful union also came Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of the underworld, making sure that none of the dead could escape and no living soul could enter without permission. This monstrous watchdog was relentless and fierce, its multiple heads snapping and growling. Its presence alone a warning to all who dared approach the land of the dead. They also bore the mighty Draco, or dragon, which stood guard over the golden fleece in Colchis, a treasure coveted by many heroes and kings. A beast who was deathless and watchful, never sleeping as it protected its precious charge from all who sought to claim it. Another fearful child was Scylla, a strange and terrible creature who was woman from the waist up, but had dog-like forms below, with 6 savage dog heads sprouting from her body, each ready to snarl and tear at any unlucky sailor passing her rocky domain. This dreadful monster was eventually confronted and slain by the great hero Heracles, whose courage and strength were famed far and wide. The Chimera, a creature with the forepart of a lion, the hind part of a serpent, and the middle shaped like a she-goat, was yet another fearsome child of Typhon and Echidna. She breathed fire and brought terror to the land of Lycia until she too was slain by a hero, her savage power finally overcome. The Sphinx, known for her riddles and deadly cunning, was born of the same dreadful pair and haunted the lands of Boeotia, challenging travelers with puzzles that could mean death if answered wrongly. The Hydra, a many-headed serpent with 9 heads, was a monstrous child of Typhon and Echidna, raised by the goddess Hera herself out of hatred for the hero Heracles. The Hydra's heads regrew when cut off, making her nearly invincible until Heracles finally defeated her through sheer determination and cleverness near the spring of Lerna. The Hesperian dragon was yet another fearsome beast, guarding the golden apples of the Hesperides beyond the western seas, a beast whose deadly vigilance was known to all. Among these monsters was also the eagle sent by Zeus to torment the Titan Prometheus, eternally eating his liver as punishment. Some said this eagle was also born of Typhon and Echidna, while others claimed it came from Gaia and Tartarus, still tying the terrible bird to the great forces of chaos and punishment. The Harpies, dreadful bird women who chased and harassed others, were also children of Typhon, and when the winged Boreads pursued them, they called upon their terrible father for aid. In response, Typhon rose, bringing darkness and chaos with him, mixing the skies in turmoil and voicing his rage, unwilling to surrender to the gods who sought to control or chase away his wild and dreadful children. Through these monstrous offspring, Typhon and Echidna represented the forces of chaos, danger, and destruction, creatures born from the earth and sky's wildness, forces opposed to the order of gods and men. Each monster they bore stood as a symbol of wild and dangerous powers lurking beyond the bounds of civilization, tests and threats that heroes had to face and overcome. These terrifying beings haunted the edges of the ancient world, challenging the rule of gods, the bravery of men, and the safety of cities. Through their stories, ancient myth showed the struggle between the forces of order and chaos, civilization and wildness, light and darkness. The many monsters born of Typhon and Echidna were reminders of the dangers hidden in nature and the need for courage, wisdom, and strength to face and defeat these ancient threats. They were the living embodiment of the fears and challenges that shaped the myths and legends that have survived to this day. After Zeus had cast the Titans out of heaven, the earth, known as Gaia, driven by her love for the deep pit of Tartaros, brought forth her youngest child, Typhoeus. This child was unlike any other. His hands and arms were mighty and strong, working ceaselessly without tiring. His powerful feet never ceased in movement. From his broad shoulders grew 100 serpent heads, dreadful dragon-like creatures with dark tongues that flickered and licked in terrible ways. From beneath the eyelids of these inhuman heads fiery, glittering eyes shone fiercely, flashing fire with every glance. Each of these terrible heads did not only glare, but also voiced dreadful sounds, sometimes speaking in words the gods could understand, but more often making horrible noises like the roar of a furious bull, proud and full of rage beyond control, or the cruel roar of a lion shameless in its fury. At times, the monstrous creature's voice sounded like the barking of wild dogs, which was strange and terrifying to hear, and sometimes he whistled with such power that the echo bounced off the tall mountains far and wide. This wild and fearful noise struck awe and terror into anyone who heard it. Typhoeus was not only fierce in appearance, but in every part of him showed power and dread. His very presence made the earth shake and the sky darken. His huge form was the embodiment of storms, fire, and chaos, and he challenged the rule of the gods with his wild might. The gods watched in fear and anger, knowing this was a challenge unlike any before. Typhoeus was the last child born to Gaia and Tartaros, created to oppose Zeus himself, to take from him the sovereignty over gods and men. As Typhoeus raised his voice and spread his terrible shapes, fire flashed from his eyes and he hurled red-hot rocks at the sky, determined to overthrow the divine order and plunge the world into chaos. His body was a mixture of man and many serpents, wings spread wide, and he moved with power beyond all other creatures. The sound of his many voices called out like a dreadful army, threatening and roaring at the high throne of Olympus. The ground beneath him trembled as he strode, the mountains shook, and the air filled with the terrible hisses and roars from his many heads and serpent coils. The gods prepared to meet this monstrous enemy who had come to challenge their reign. Zeus took up his thunderbolt, the weapon of his power, his hand steady and firm as the storm god prepared for the great battle. The clash between Zeus and Typhoeus was a mighty struggle, a fight of cosmic importance that shook the heavens and earth. Thunder roared and lightning flashed as Zeus hurled his thunderbolts with fierce might. Typhoeus answered with hisses and fiery breath, his many serpent heads snapping and roaring, shaking the sky with his terrible voice. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and the seas roared with the fury of their battle. At times it seemed Typhoeus might overthrow the gods and take the throne, his strength and fury unmatched. But Zeus, with courage and the power given to him by the older gods, fought back fiercely. The battle raged on, thunder clashing with fiery breath, lightning flashing against the roar of many voices. At last, after a long and terrible fight, Zeus struck a mighty blow, casting Typhoeus down. The giant was defeated, bound and imprisoned deep beneath Mount Etna, where he was trapped under its burning weight. From there it was said that Typhoeus's fiery breath caused the volcano to erupt, the smoke and fire rising from the mountain as a reminder of his imprisoned fury. This great battle was more than a fight of strength. It was the victory of order over chaos, of the gods' rule over the wild and dangerous forces of the world. The story of Zeus and Typhoeus showed the power of the gods to maintain control over the universe, to keep the balance and protect the world from destruction. It was a tale of fearsome strength, terrible monsters, and the bravery of the gods. A story passed down through generations as a symbol of the struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos. Typhoeus, the monstrous child of earth and the pit, with his 100 serpent heads, fiery eyes, and terrible voice, remains one of the greatest challenges the gods ever faced, a symbol of the wild forces that threaten the safety and order of the world but were overcome by the courage and power of Zeus. If Zeus had not been quick to see what was happening, things would have passed beyond repair, and Typhoeus would have become the master of both gods and mortals. But Zeus, the father of gods and men, sensed the danger and responded with a mighty, heavy clap of thunder that caused the earth to echo with a grim sound. The wide heavens above, the sea, the streams of Oceanus, and even the underground chambers trembled from the power of that thunderclap. The great Mount Olympus shook beneath the immortal feet of Zeus as he moved, and the earth groaned beneath him. The heat and blaze from both of them, the thunder and lightning of Zeus, and the fiery breath and storm winds of the monstrous Typhoeus, covered the dark-faced sea. Flames and scorching winds from both combatants mixed with the roaring thunder and flashing lightning, making the sky, sea, and land boil violently. Towering waves tossed and struck the rocky promontories. Whipped by the furious wind stirred up by these immortals, a great shaking of the earth followed the terrible clash, and even Hades, lord of the dead, trembled at the dreadful encounter. The Titans imprisoned beneath Tartarus, dwelling beside the ancient Kronos, were shaken and terrified by the endless noise and fury of the battle. Zeus, gathering all his strength, seized his weapons, thunder, lightning, and his glowing thunderbolt, and leapt from Olympus to meet Typhoeus in battle. He struck with fierce power, setting fire to all the terrible serpent heads that crowned the dreadful monster. As Zeus delivered his mighty blows, Typhoeus crashed down, crippled and broken, and the earth groaned beneath his massive weight. The flames from the thunder-smitten giant spread across the dark and steep forests of the mountains, setting a great part of the earth ablaze with the powerful winds of his burning heat. The melting of the ground beneath him was like the melting of tin in the carefully grooved crucible where craftsmen work it with great care, or like iron in the heat of the forge, though iron melts more slowly and with more resistance. This vivid burning and destruction showed the raw power of the battle and the terrible might of the two immortal foes. The great war between Zeus and Typhoeus was not only a fight of strength, but a fierce contest of elemental forces. The lightning and thunder of the sky, God against the fiery breath and many serpent heads of the monstrous giant. The clash caused the very foundations of the earth to shake and set forests and mountains on fire. Yet, even with all his fiery power and terrifying form, Typhoeus could not stand against the supreme might of Zeus. This battle was the final contest for control of the heavens and the earth, where the wild, destructive force represented by Typhoeus was tamed and subdued by the ordered power of Zeus. The victory of Zeus ensured that the gods would remain rulers of the world, and that the terrifying chaos Typhoeus represented would remain imprisoned and unable to destroy the divine order. The story of this battle has been told and retold across generations, symbolizing the struggle between order and chaos, between the rule of the gods and the wild forces of nature. Typhoeus remains the greatest threat ever faced by the Olympian gods, a creature of terrible strength, fire, and many serpent heads, whose defeat secured the peace and stability of the world. The strongest substance, forged deep within the heart of the earth, was said to melt under the fierce stress of blazing fire that raged in the mountain forests. This fire was no ordinary flame, but a divine blaze kindled and controlled by Hephaestos, the god of craftsmanship and fire, working his art within the very core of the earth. It was in this sacred and fiery forge that the earth itself seemed to melt, giving birth to powerful forces. Yet this force was not left unchecked. Zeus, in a tumult of great anger, cast the monstrous Typhoeus deep into the broad and dark realm of Tartaros, the underworld pit, far from the skies and the lands of men. From Typhoeus, a creature born of the earth's violent fury, sprang the winds that blow over the earth and sea. Among these winds, some were gentler and kind. The god sent breezes who carried blessings to mankind. These included Notos, the south wind, Boreas, the north wind, and Zephyros, the west wind, known for their clear and favorable presence. They were a great gift to men, bringing fresh air and good weather, aiding sailors and farmers alike. But the other winds, born from Typhoeus's chaotic breath, were wild and fitful, blowing unpredictably over the seas. These fierce winds rushed over the misty oceans, stirring great storms and causing havoc for those who dared to sail. They scattered ships like fragile leaves upon the waves, destroying sailors who had no power to resist their violent blasts. These winds changed with the seasons, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, always a threat to men upon the sea. On land, they were no less cruel. They swept across the boundless, flowering earth, spoiling the fair fields that men worked hard to cultivate. They brought dust and uproar, tearing through the crops and disturbing the peaceful lives of those below. This was the legacy of Typhoeus, the terrible earth-born monster whose violent power no man could tame. In the words of the ancient poet Pindar, violence and rage lead only to ruin, even for the proud and hard-hearted. The mighty Typhoeus, known also as Kilikion Typhon, the 100-headed beast from the caves of Cilicia, could not escape his fate. His 100 heads hissed out terror and destruction. His jaws opened wide in terrible roars, and his eyes flashed with a hideous glare. He dared to challenge the sovereignty of Zeus himself, as if he could storm the heavens and overthrow the king of gods. But despite his strength and fury, he was no match for the power of Zeus's lightning. The unsleeping bolt of Zeus, a swooping brand of fire and flame, struck Typhoeus down in his rage. It frightened the monster, silencing his loud boasts and crushing him to the very heart. This story was remembered in the ancient tragedy of Aeschylus, who told of Prometheus, the Titan who had pity upon Typhoeus. Prometheus saw the earth-born creature trapped in violence and pain, a destructive monster forced into submission by the will of the gods. Typhoeus was a force of chaos, a wild and impetuous being who withstood all gods with terrifying power. His 100 heads and terrible breath brought fear to the world, but ultimately even he was brought low by the might of Zeus, reminding all that violence, no matter how fierce, leads to ruin and defeat. He was burnt to ashes, his body broken and his once immeasurable strength blasted from him by the unstoppable force of the lightning bolt, the weapon of Zeus, the king of the gods. The thunder roared across the heavens, and in that terrible moment of divine wrath, Typhon, the monstrous force of chaos and destruction, fell. No longer was he the terrible, towering shape that had once challenged Olympus itself. Now he was reduced to a helpless, sprawling bulk, no longer a threat, no longer a godlike enemy, but a fallen giant pressed down under the very weight of the earth. He lies beneath the narrow stretch of sea, far below the ground, crushed and pinned by the deep roots of Echidna, Mount Etna, an ancient and powerful volcano that rose high into the sky. There, beneath the burning mountain, he remains buried, not simply cast aside, but sealed beneath the very earth, his punishment eternal. And on the mountain's highest summit sits Hephaestus, the god of fire and forging, with his hammer and his anvil, striking the molten ore with tireless strength, shaping metal in the heat that rises from the depths below. The god who works with flame now works directly above the resting place of Typhon, the being of fire and fury, whose rage even in death has not gone out entirely. For it is said that one day, from beneath that mountain, Typhon's rage will once again make itself known. It will not be through words or through battle, but through the earth itself. the land will shake, and the mountain will split, and from it will burst forth rivers of fire. These rivers will not flow gently or kindly. They will come with savage mouths, devouring everything in their path. Fields once green and full of fruit, plains tended by the hands of men, the gentle lands of Sicily, Sicily, known for its beauty and rich earth, will be scorched and blackened by the burning flood. It is Typhon's final rage, his last scream sent upward through stone and fire, a memory of his fury channeled through hot, violent jets of fire-breathing lava, still full of the power he once held. Even though he was charred and defeated by the lightning of Zeus, even though he was buried and broken, the spirit of Typhon remains, boiling beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when he can strike back in the only way left to him. His body may be buried, but his fire still rises. Elsewhere, his image lives on not just in the land, but in the minds and symbols of men. In the story of the Seven against Thebes, one of the warriors who rose to fight was Hippomedon, a man so huge and powerful in appearance that even the sight of him caused fear. When he moved, the earth seemed to tremble beneath his steps. He carried with him a massive shield, a disc so great and so heavy that it drew the eyes of all who saw it. But it was not only its size that struck terror, it was the design etched upon it. The artist who crafted this image was not an ordinary man, not a mere decorator of weapons, but a skilled and visionary symbol maker who chose no ordinary symbol. Upon that shield, he placed the image of Typhon, not in peace or defeat, but alive with fury, breathing fire from his mouth. The fire turned to smoke, thick and black, swirling across the surface of the shield, a living representation of destruction, as if the shield itself might erupt. Around the edge of the shield, twisting and curling, were snakes, braided in patterns that suggested chaos, power, and venom. The shield did not just protect, it terrified. It reminded all who saw it of the power of Typhon, of what once was and what could be again. But there was a purpose to this symbol, and the gods themselves watched as the battle was arranged. Hermes, the swift-footed messenger, the god of balance and matchmaking, chose Hyperbios to face Hippomedon. It was a battle not just of men, but of ideals, of divine powers, of symbols brought into combat. For upon Hyperbios' shield stood not Typhon, but Zeus himself, tall and upright, calm and strong, his lightning bolt glowing in his hand, ready to strike. The clash of shields was more than a clash of weapons. It was a replaying of the ancient war between the sky god and the monster. The fire-breathing chaos on one side, the divine thunder on the other. Typhon against Zeus once more, not in the skies above or the depths below, but here now, in the hands of mortals. And so the fate of the men was tied to the fate of the gods they carried. Zeus, undefeated, whose power had sealed Typhon beneath the earth, still stood unconquered. And if the signs meant anything, if the symbols had power, then Hyperbios would win, because Zeus had never lost. And Zeus was with him. It was more than just belief. It was destiny written in myth, played again on the battlefield. The one with Typhon would fall, as Typhon fell before, and the one with Zeus would rise, as Zeus rose in the heavens. The favor of the gods was clear, their message as strong as lightning in the sky. The victor was not just the stronger warrior, but the one chosen by the divine order. Zeus had struck Typhon down once and would strike him again in any form he rose in, be it beast or shield or man. And so it would be here. The power of Typhon, once the terror of gods and men, once the wild roar of nature itself, was now reduced to memory, to symbol, to a warning. Even in his most defiant form, as fire and smoke etched in metal, his defeat was certain, because no one had ever seen Zeus conquered. The battle would echo the past. The gods on the shields would reflect their ancient battle, and the men beneath them would follow the path laid out by myth and fate. Typhon's time had passed. His fire may rise, his story may be told, but he would never again hold victory. The mountain burns, the earth shakes, the fire speaks, but Zeus remains, standing above all. His shield, emblazoned with the image of an earthborn spirit, a chthonic deity hated by both mortals and gods alike, was a symbol not of protection, but of doom. The sight of this figure, unloved, feared, and detested, was enough for seers to predict the bearer's fall. They believed firmly that anyone who carried the image of Zeus's great enemy would not survive the battle, would surely drop their head in death before the gates, for the image brought no favor, only wrath. It was a mark of misfortune, and its presence on a shield foretold failure. And from this belief grew the larger story, the deeper myth, one that echoed from the beginnings of the gods themselves, one that tied the fate of warriors to a deeper and darker power born from the earth. Long before the shield was made, long before battles of men began, there was a time when even the gods feared what rose from below. When the Gigantes, the great giants, were defeated by the gods of Olympus, the earth herself, Gaia, was filled with rage. Her children had been cast down and destroyed, and she did not forget. Her anger grew, rooted deep in the soil, and from this fury she went to Tartaros, the dark pit beneath the world, and there she conceived another child, more terrible than any before. She gave birth to Typhon in the land of Cilicia, Cilicia, a place at the edge of the known world. And from the moment of his birth, Typhon was not like other beings. He was not man, and he was not beast, but a terrible mixture of both, the greatest and most monstrous of all Gaia's children. His form was gigantic beyond all imagining. From the waist up, he was shaped like a man, but no man had ever grown so tall. His head touched the stars, and his shoulders stretched above all the mountains. His arms reached out across the world, one hand extending to the west, the other to the east, as if he could grasp the entire horizon in his grasp. But where his legs should have been, there were coils of vipers, massive and living, that twisted and reached up toward his head, their hisses shaking the air like thunder. From these serpents came a sound so loud and angry that even the sky seemed to tremble. His entire body was covered in wings, beating against the wind, adding to his power and speed. His hair, tangled and filthy, blew wildly in the wind, hanging in matted strands from his face and neck. His eyes were full of fire, not just metaphorically, but literally. Flames flashed from his gaze, and wherever he looked, the world burned. When he moved, it was like a storm. When he breathed, fire and smoke poured from his mouth. And when he shouted, it was a mix of human cries and serpent screams, a terrifying blend of sound and fury. With this power, with this form, Typhon hurled burning rocks at the sky, daring to challenge the heavens, to bring down Olympus, to strike fear into the very heart of the gods. And fear he did bring, for when the gods saw him, saw this storm of fire and stone rising toward them, they turned and fled. They left their seats in Olympus and raced to Aegyptos, Egypt, fleeing from the creature they knew they could not face alone. And to hide from him, they took the forms of animals, disguising themselves in fear. This was not cowardice, it was survival. For Typhon, in his rage, could not be faced easily, but Zeus, the king of the gods, did not hide. From far off, he hurled his thunderbolts, hoping to strike Typhon down before he could come closer. But Typhon pressed on, not slowed by fire or lightning, and so Zeus took a new weapon, a sickle made of adamant, a blade so sharp and strong that it could cut through anything. With this in hand, he chased Typhon as he fled, the god always just behind the monster, never letting him rest. The chase took them to Mount Cassion in Syria, a place where the earth rose toward the sky, and there the two finally clashed. Zeus, seeing that his lightning had wounded Typhon, moved in to strike with his hands, thinking he could finish the battle. But Typhon was not done. With his coils, with his many limbs, he wrapped himself around the god. He entangled Zeus, binding him, trapping him in a grip no mortal could escape. And in that moment, the world held its breath. For this was no longer a chase. It was a struggle of strength and fury, of sky and earth locked together. The god of thunder and the monster of chaos, face to face, hand to hand, locked in a battle that shook the mountains and split the sky. Typhon, born from hate and fire, fought with all the power of the deep, while Zeus, ruler of Olympus, fought with lightning and divine will. The storm that boiled around them was not weather, but war. Not rain, but falling sparks. Not wind, but the cry of serpents and gods. It was a moment when all things were uncertain, when even the stars might have turned away. And still they fought, wrapped together, gods and monsters, thunder and flame. Wrapped tight in the crushing coils of Typhon, Zeus, the king of the gods, was momentarily overpowered by the monstrous might of the earth-born terror. With swift and brutal strength, Typhon snatched up the sickle, the same sharp weapon that had once cut the heavens and defied the old powers, and used it to slice the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, removing the very tendons that gave him strength and movement. Helpless now, the great god who had ruled Olympus with power and lightning was reduced to a prisoner, his body weak and motionless, robbed of the divine energy that once flowed through him like fire. Typhon, carrying Zeus on his massive shoulders like a broken trophy, crossed the sea to Kilikia, the wild and distant land where shadows stretched long and mountains loomed heavy. There, deep in the dark and echoing hollows of the Corycion cave, he laid the powerless god down among the damp rock and silence. To ensure Zeus would never recover, Typhon took the stolen sinews, the lifelines of godly strength, and wrapped them carefully inside the skin of a bear, as if sealing them away from the world, hiding them in a shape that blurred the line between beast and divine power. As guardian, he placed the Dracaena Delphine, a strange and wild creature, part woman, part beast, a guardian who was feared for both her strength and her unnatural form. Her presence was meant to end all hope of rescue, but hope was not lost, for in the quiet shadow, Hermes, the quick-footed god of cleverness and speed, together with Aegipan, a goat-like god of the wild, crept unseen into the cave. Silent as air, unnoticed by Delphine, they stole back the sinews, carrying them out from the dark place where Zeus had been hidden, and with delicate skill, they restored them to the body of Zeus, placing them back into his hands and feet, returning him his power, his motion, and his command over thunder and sky. With strength reborn and rage rekindled, Zeus rose again, no longer bound, no longer silent. From the heavens he appeared in sudden fury, riding across the sky in a chariot drawn by winged horses, his lightning bolts ready in hand, crackling with the anger of a god who had been brought low but was now returned to full might. He chased Typhon with relentless fury, hurling thunder and fire through the sky, pursuing him over land and sea until they came to the mountain of Nysa. It was here in this sacred place that the Moirai, the fates themselves, deceived Typhon. They lured him with fruit that grew on Nysa, ephemeral and strange, the fruit of Dionysus, intoxicating and dizzying. They convinced him that the fruit would give him even more power, more strength to fight the gods. And so Typhon, full of desperation and blinded by desire for victory, ate the fruit. But instead of gaining power, his senses dulled, his strength weakened, and he stumbled again into flight. He fled toward Thrake, wild and desperate, his great body crashing through the lands until he reached the region of Hymos. There he turned once more to fight, lifting whole mountains and hurling them at Zeus in rage and defiance. But Zeus, standing unshaken, hurled them back with his thunderbolts. The mountains, instead of falling upon the sky, came crashing down upon Typhon, smashing against him and causing a flood of blood to pour from his wounded body. It soaked the mountain, staining its rocks red, and it is said that this is why the mountain is named Hymos, the blood of Typhon still remembered in its name. Defeated once again, but not yet destroyed, Typhon tried to escape through the sea, his path leading him to the Cycalian waters. He moved through the sea, vast and stormy, with desperation, seeking escape from the wrath of the god he had tried to overcome. But Zeus would not allow it. With the sky blazing and the sea boiling, Zeus raised one final punishment. He called down Mount Etna, a massive mountain full of fire and stone, and hurled it upon Typhon. The entire weight of the mountain came down, pinning Typhon beneath it, crushing his body under rock and flame, sealing him forever into the land. And from that day onward, Etna has never rested. The mountain still erupts, still sends fire and smoke into the sky, not as an ordinary volcano, but as the breathing, burning spirit of Typhon still buried deep beneath it. His rage not gone but trapped, his fire not gone but imprisoned under the stone. They say the eruptions are his fury, trying to rise once more, the memory of his battle with Zeus echoing through the centuries. His form, once terrible and tall enough to brush the stars, now lies beneath the crust of the earth, his arms pinned, his breath turned to smoke, his cries muffled by stone. But the story does not end there. On the slopes of the Caucasus, mountains near the rock called Typhoon, people say the marks of that ancient war still remain. It was there, after the thunderbolt struck him with full force, that Typhon's blood spilled warm from his head, soaking the soil and burning into the rock. From there, wounded and burning, he made his way through pain and ruin to the plains and mountains of Nysa, the place of fruit and illusion, the place where he had once believed he could find strength. And there he lies to this day, not alive in body, but alive in story, in land, in mountain, in smoke. He is buried beneath the things we see, under mountain ranges, under rivers of fire, under ash and myth. Though he no longer stands, his shape and memory live in the tremble of the earth, in the heat of volcanic flame, in the shadow of high mountains that once rained down upon him. He is both a warning and a force, a power too wild to ever be free again, but too mighty to be forgotten. The earth remembers his steps, the sky remembers his roar, and Zeus, who struck him down with lightning and flame, still rides the winds above the mountains where Typhon fell. Fed in the waters of the Serbonian lake, the place of ancient silence and buried chaos, where legends say Typhon, the monstrous force of the earth, once found his end, though not by fading away, but by being swallowed into the murky depths, hidden in the shadows of nature's forgotten corners. His name lives on in whispers and in the shifting sands that border the lake. For even in defeat, the memory of his rage is not gone. Typhon, the one who challenged the very heavens, whose defiance made the gods tremble, who raised his hands, each a serpent-headed arm, and dared to wrestle the sky from Zeus himself, came to his bitter end not through aging or retreat, but by the relentless strike of Zeus's fury. For when the great king of the gods rose in battle against the earth-born giants, he showed no mercy, slaying their leader Melinos in Crete and bringing Typhon to his knees in Phrygia, far from Olympus, in a place of dust and rock, where divine power met raw chaos. There in the dry earth, the great beast fell, blasted by lightning, scorched by the fire that poured from the sky, until all his strength left him. And so he lay, like the ancient stories say, stretched out in the dust, massive and motionless, just like Typhon after Zeus's thunderbolts had struck him down, no longer rising, no longer roaring, but still a thing of terror even in defeat. His body, once so vast it reached the stars, now filled the valleys with its stillness, and among the tales of gods and mortals, another name is spoken softly, the name of Pan of Korikos, the rustic god of the wild, whose cleverness, not strength, turned the tide when power alone was not enough. For some say it was Pan's own son, a guardian spirit of the forests and cliffs, who once saved Zeus when the god of gods was trapped, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a trick, a lie wrapped in hunger and false promise. He spoke to Typhon, the terrible 100-headed serpent, and lured him from his deep and spacious pit with talk of a great feast, a banquet of fish laid out by the shore. Typhon, still filled with arrogance and craving satisfaction, stepped into the open, leaving his place of safety. And there, not a feast, but doom awaited. Zeus, waiting in the sky, unleashed his lightning, a rain of flame and roaring fire that fell not like drops, but like spears of burning sky. The bolts struck Typhon again and again, and each time his heads thrashed and hissed and cried out, smashing into the rocks that lined the shore. The force of it all tore his massive body apart like wool carded by cruel hands. And even now, the yellow shores where it happened are said to still show the stain of that battle, red with the blood of the Typhonian war, as if the very earth still remembers where the monster fell. The scar of his fall never left the land, just as his story never left the minds of those who heard of it. Typhon's name, once a title of fear, became a symbol, one used again and again when speaking of things beyond control, of rage and disaster, of storm and fire. He was compared to no one, but others were compared to him. Like Typhoeus of old, they said, when Zeus struck down the giant, the Gigantoletos, the one who killed giants, the breaker of storms. The poets and storytellers spoke of Typhon not as a myth, but as the ultimate example of what happens when the natural world rises up against the divine, when the deep earth and sky fight for supremacy. Pseudo-Hyginus, the Roman myth-teller, wrote of Typhon as the son of Tartarus and Tartara, born from the deepest pit of existence itself, shaped not in beauty, but in terror. His body, immense and impossible, had 100 dragon-serpent heads sprouting from his shoulders, a crown of horror and teeth. He did not come with peace. He came to challenge. He came to demand the throne of Olympus, to tear the rule from Zeus and take it for himself. But Zeus, holding nothing back, lifted his flaming thunderbolt and drove it straight into Typhon's breast. And the blow was not just physical, it was final. The fire of the bolt spread through him, burning through his many heads, turning his shouts into screams, his fire into smoke. And to seal the battle forever, Zeus placed Mount Etna, the towering volcano of Sicily, directly upon him. He pinned the monster under rock and mountain and ash, burying him not just in body but in place, sealing the rage under stone. And to this day, they say, the mountain still burns with Typhon's anger, not cooled by centuries, not stilled by the weight. The fire that erupts from Etna is not just lava, but the breath of a god-slayer who lost. Even Ovid, writing of distant transformations and divine changes, spoke of Zeus soaring through the sky to the very edge of the ether after his victory. The sky was split with fire, the earth broken by force, and in between lay Typhon, defeated but not erased. He remains part of every shaking mountain, every strange rumble of the earth, every storm that seems more than just weather. He was the storm made flesh, and though Zeus won, the world still bears the scars. In the rocks of Phrygia, in the blood-colored cliffs by the sea, in the restless heart of Etna, the pieces of his defeat remain. No matter how many poets tell the tale, no matter how often the gods are named victorious, Typhon's story is never one of silence. He is the measure of divine power, for no battle was harder fought, and no enemy struck such fear into the heavens. The great beast, born from the depths of Tartarus, the one with the 100 serpent heads, whose arms reached across the world, who raised whole mountains and hurled them like stones, who once stole Zeus's sinews and nearly brought Olympus to its knees, now lies buried. But his fire, his name, and his shadow live on in earth, in myth, and in flame.